Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to get started in just 1 or 2 minutes. We want to make sure we've got everybody in the Zoom room with us. So if you are joining us right now, once you get yourself settled, please drop your name and location in the chat so we have a sense of who's here and where you're from. If you are from a partner organization, please let us know as well. Happy to see you here. And so again, we're going to get started in just another couple of minutes. I can see that there are still more folks that are coming into the Zoom. So if you are here, if you're looking for Penn Future's webinar on economic policy is environmental policy, you are in the right place, my friends. And while you're getting settled, please drop your name and your location in the chat so we can learn a little bit more about who's here. And again, if you're with a particular organization, please feel free to let us know what organization that is as well. And I see that we've still got a few more people, so I'm going to give it maybe another 30 seconds before we kick this off. Welcome, folks. If you are here for the Economic Policy is Environmental Policy webinar from Penn Future, you're in the right place. Please kick back, get yourselves settled. And while you are settling in and waiting for us to get started, please drop your name and your location in the chat so we can learn a little bit more about who all is in the room this evening with us. And thank you for joining us. And again, if you are with a particular organization, we'd appreciate if you'd let us know what organization that is, maybe where it's based, just so we can get a sense of who is here and who's interested in this conversation about sustainable economics. And with that, I think that'll be my last reminder. So I'm going to hand it on over to my colleague, Jenny, to get us started with this event. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see all of us in just a moment.
Thanks, Donna. Once again, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I am seeing the flags that the chat is disabled, so just so you know, we're working on that in the background in the meantime. But tonight we are discussing Penn Future's latest report, Economic Policy is Environmental Policy, Prioritizing Environmental Progress in Pennsylvania's Department of Community and Economic Development. This report outlines the ways that the PA-DCED can be leveraged to support Pennsylvania's transition to clean energy, how that transition can improve quality of life for communities and create family-sustaining jobs for workers. Penn Future is embarking on projects that connect economic development and environmental issues in order to promote a healthy economy, healthy communities, and a healthy environment. For those who might be new to our organization, Penn Future is a member-supported statewide environmental advocacy nonprofit and watchdog fighting against potential threats to PA's clean air, pure water, and healthy climate. Since 1998, we've been combining legislative advocacy and legal enforcement at the local, state, and federal levels, educational outreach, and civic engagement support for just and equitable environmental outcomes to improve the quality of life for all Pennsylvanians. We have offices across Pennsylvania, including Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Erie, and the Poconos. So I'm going to introduce the Penn Future team members who are here. As Donna mentioned, my name is Jenny Tompkins. I am Penn Future's Clean Water Campaign Manager. We also have all of our campaigns team here, it turns out. So Donna Kohut is the policy manager for sustainable economics. She's going to be leading this effort and presenting more about the report. Campaigns director Annie Regan is leading technical support tonight. So she's on the back end helping with the chat. So in the meantime, if you have any other issues, please put those in the Q&A and Annie will make sure to address them. And then we're joined by Penn Future President and CEO Pat McDonough, and he'll give a few remarks in a few minutes. So before we get started, I want to make sure to go over a couple of nuts and bolts and reminders about utilizing Zoom. So one note is this event is being live streamed in addition to being recorded. So going forward, that'll be available on our Facebook page, and we can share a link to the Facebook recording as well as the Zoom recording. You can access closed captioning and enable that by looking closely at the bottom of your screen where there's a word captions. If you click that and then click the option to enable closed captioning, you may find that you need to go to the three little dots and click those to see the closed captioning feature. After the event, I mentioned we'll send an email around with recordings as well as links that we share in the chat or Q&A this evening. And then if you have questions, we're going to hold those off until a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. We may be able to answer some of them as we go along. So with logistics out of the way, I want to introduce President and CEO Pat McDonough again, who is going to provide a background on Penn Future's decision to focus on sustainable economic development as a cross-cutting priority for our work. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you all for your interest and attention here tonight. I'm Pat McDonough, President and CEO here at Penn Future, and as Jenny said, we're fighting for clean air, clean water, clean energy, and we're doing that in our courts. We're doing that in the Capitol, engaged with agencies as we're talking about tonight, and legislators, as well as in communities through our civic engagement team. Prior to my time here at Penn Future, I was in state government for 25 years, the last 6 of which I was Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And one of the things that I learned in that time in state government is that while a lot of attention tends to get paid to the environment at the point of permits or at the point of an inspection, a lot of decisions get really baked into the process in those early stages, and those being, when someone's deciding where to locate a facility, the types of facilities that the state is looking to incentivize across the Commonwealth. So that was an impetus, one for me, but two, when I joined the organization, it was something that was already underway in terms of an area of focus for Penn Future. One of the reasons I was excited to join the organization, in fact. So we got to work on that. Donna is going to be presenting our initial report. She's also been working on some blog posts. But if we're truly going to be about climate, if we're truly going to be about clean air, if we're truly going to be about clean water, we really need to look at the entire ecosystem, pun intended, of how decisions get made, how pollution enters our environment, and how greenhouse gases enter our atmosphere. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to Donna. Donna, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to Jenny for that great introduction, and to Pat for kind of laying the groundwork. Appreciate that. So bear with me for a moment. I'm going to share my screen and get this presentation going. All right. So folks, we're going to dive right in. And just as Pat said, we're going to explain why economic policy is environmental policy. For folks who aren't particularly familiar with sustainable economics, please consider this an introduction to that topic, as well as an introduction to this new work that we're doing here at Penn Future. So just to cover a bit about the ground that we're going to cover tonight, we're going to talk about what is sustainability. We're going to do a bit of imagining and to explore what a sustainable economy would look like in Pennsylvania. I'm going to provide an overview of our report called Economic Policy is Environmental Policy. I'll go over the policy recommendations that are included in that report. And then hopefully we should have about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of this. And again, this is a friendly reminder, and thank you to those who have been sticking with the chat and the Q&A. Please, while I'm going through this presentation, if you have thoughts, comments, questions, please put them in the Q&A so that Annie can go through them on the back end, and then we can hopefully address most of them towards the end of this event. So sustainability, what is that? I think one of my favorite explanations for what is sustainability is this notion of having enough for everyone forever. That sounds really utopian. It sounds quite lovely. What does that mean? Essentially, sustainability and this notion of having enough for everyone forever asks us, how do we meet society's needs, its current needs, without sacrificing the opportunities or quality of life of future generations? Again, this is a tall order, but again, it's very much worth exploring. And in order to do that, on the right, I have this graphic, which is a sort of visualization, I think, of sustainability and that type of thinking. It is a compass with the 4 primary directions on it, and it really demonstrates how we should be thinking about balancing the various needs within our society. So, for instance, how do we balance having a robust economy with while protecting and ensuring the well-being of communities and individuals? And how do we balance the needs of society uh, along with the needs of nature? So, how do we keep this balancing act going so that we can ensure quality of life, not just for those of us who are here now, but for future generations? So we're going to keep diving a little bit deeper as we go into sustainability. These are just a few of the fundamental principles, and I'm going to start with long-term thinking. Essentially, it is pretty self-explanatory. It's thinking and planning in the long term. It means having a vision, and it means creating a plan to actualize that vision. It means not looking for quick fixes. It means not constantly looking at or being distracted by the next shiny object. Um, and essentially, it relies upon having data, having information, and really going through and analyzing that data and information so that we can go back to that plan, go back to that vision, and make sure that we are on the right path and recognize what we need to do to get there. And systems thinking is another piece of sustainability. And essentially, systems thinking acknowledges that we live in a world governed by complex and nuanced systems. They are all around us and they are interconnected. So I'm going to provide another kind of visualization for you. If you think back to maybe elementary school when folks were talking about the food web, we learned that anytime you plucked on one of those threads on the web, it impacted the other pieces of the web, the other plants, animals, etc. involved. It impacted the strength of that structure of the web. Systems thinking is a lot like that. It's acknowledging that all of our actions have consequences, and we need to think through what those consequences may be. And also recognizing that the different systems are also interconnected. So in our culture, we tend to separate the ecosystem from the economy, when in actuality, those two directly impact one another. If something happens in our ecosystems, let's say there is a natural disaster, that is going to impact our economy. And if our economy, again, is maybe built towards growth, 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 expansion, expansion, that will directly impact our ecosystem and the natural resources we rely on. So again, this is that notion of systems thinking. And then finally, this last piece of diversity as a way to resilience. I'm going to share 2 kind of quick stories, and I'm going to pre-apologize if there are any fellow historians on this webinar right now, because I'm going to paint a historical event with very broad strokes. And so if we look back to the 1800s, you can think about the Irish potato famine. So over in Ireland, they really relied on potatoes as a crop, as a staple for all of their needs. And in particular, there was one kind of potato that they really relied on. So when disease swept through this crop, it really had a massive impact, a disastrous impact on Ireland. And it created famine and it created a crisis. And so folks went hungry, folks fled the country, etc. And part of the reason that happened, or part of the reason it was so challenging, was because it was a monoculture, meaning they relied upon one staple. They relied upon one particular kind of potato. So what do potatoes have to do with the economy? What does this 1800s event have to do with the economy? Well, let's put it another way. Think about a community that relies solely upon one industry or one company. I come from the anthracite coal region. I understand this really, really well. When a particular industry fails or flees a community, that community can get hollowed out. There's nothing else for them to rely on, and it can potentially fail. So, this notion of diversity as resilience means let's have many different industries. Let's have many other forms of income. Let's have many other um, parts of our culture and our community that facilitate well-being. So instead of just relying upon one industry or one company, let's have, let's say, outdoor recreation, tourism, a really strong, robust Main Street filled with independent businesses. Let's have universities or a hospital or research and development, so that when something happens, if a crisis hits, if a company goes under, the community and the economy is able to absorb that shock. So getting a bit more specific, what makes an economy sustainable? Well, there's a bunch of things, and you'll see that these all reinforce one another. So going back to that image of the compass and balancing the various needs, a sustainable economy will serve both the social and economic interests of communities, meaning we're going to have that balance there. It's going to also enhance the health of the natural environment. So this can look like a few things. It can look like mitigating and reducing pollution. It can also look like actually improving the health of the environment. So again, thinking about where I come from, this could be rehabilitating abandoned mines. So leaving the ecosystem better than the way you find it is part of being sustainable. Next, we can talk about this notion of facilitating stability. And so again, we can think about how our economy currently tends to function, thinking about growth, thinking about short-term profit, thinking about short-term revenue, which can potentially lead to cycles of boom and bust, when in actuality, we should be figuring out how to create some level of stability for economies and for communities. Because when there is stability, workers know what to expect. They know what is available to them. They have a sense of what wages will be available to them, what benefits will be available to them, what jobs are available to them. And the same thing with industry. Industry can thrive when it understands the rules of the game and it understands the conditions under which it's trying to grow. And this stability can foster long-term thinking. So we can come up with a plan and we can move towards that plan. And then finally, sustainable economies prioritize the quality of life of the people that live within it. So this gets down to this notion or this shift in thought that gross national product or gross domestic product, excuse me, GDP, should not be the sole measure of economic success or economic stability. We really need to figure out what helps people and communities and individuals thrive in order to keep folks happy and healthy. So specifically, how do we move Pennsylvania towards a sustainable economy? Well, again, these ideas are reinforcing. We should be doing more to protect the environment. We should focus on enhancing the quality of life for folks. All of that means we need to use our natural resources more efficiently. We also need to decarbonize industry as quickly as possible. We need to reduce emissions. We need to shift to renewables. This also means identifying products, services, and processes that can help reduce or limit environmental harms. So this can harken back to something like the beginnings of a circular economy. So if we are starting some clean tech manufacturing, we're starting to manufacture EV batteries or long-term energy storage battery systems, let's take it a step forward. Are we able to recycle those batteries as well? Are we able to break apart those components and put them back into our supply chains and make supply chains regional, et cetera? There's all sorts of places we can take this. And then finally, another piece that I think may be one of the most important pieces is we really need to start reimagining our communities and our culture. And I'm thinking most specifically about energy communities who, for quite literally centuries, have had their economies, their communities, their cultures, and their identities really circled and focused on the work that they do, the industry that's in their community. And we need to, first of all, step up and acknowledge that and respect that, because as we transition away from fossil fuels, these communities are going to need additional support. And we need to be able to walk alongside folks and co create a future that is no longer dependent on those fossil fuels. And that can be especially challenging. And we need to provide a vision so folks understand where we're going and can get on board as well and know that their communities will not be left behind. So how it works, these are more practical pieces. Essentially, we need to know that we need both environmental regulations and economic incentives to move towards a sustainable and decarbonized economy. To start, that means creating and using standards and regulations for the environment. That also means creating and using financial incentives as well as technical assistance. When I talk about technical assistance, that can mean anything from supporting companies who are applying for these financial incentives and helping them through the application process, all the way to maybe you're a small or medium-sized manufacturer and you would really like to modernize your equipment. You would like to be more efficient in your processes and maybe work towards advanced manufacturing. So we, and when I say we, I mean state governments, federal governments, we need to be able to lend that support to help push them forward if that's their goal. We also need to think about marketing programs to attract more sustainable businesses and businesses that are interested in decarbonization. Again, we need to bring those folks in, let them know we're open for that sort of business, and that's the direction we're in too. And then drilling down even further, some supportive economic policies can look like a few different things. It can look like local purchasing requirements. So how do we incentivize having a local supply chain where components and products are made within a region, within a state, so that we can make sure that the economy all around, folks get jobs, folks get benefits, and folks get to participate. And we get to support those businesses as well. Local hiring requirements, similar thing. We need to make sure that when a facility comes in, those construction jobs are held by Pennsylvanians, by local folks, by regional folks. And once that facility is built, those are the local folks and regional folks are also getting those jobs. We don't need people coming in from out of state just to grab a few jobs for a few months and leave. We really need to take care of folks within the state. Labor standards are incredibly important. Specifically here, we're thinking about wages and ensuring that we have family sustaining wages and benefits. And then clawback provisions are something that the Department of Community and Economic Development are already doing. Essentially, this means that when a project is moving forward and they're receiving financing, there are specific goals or metrics that they need to meet throughout that process. And if they cannot meet those, then the DCED, that agency, is able to pull that money back and put it back into the system to help another project that will actually be able to meet those metrics. So these are some specific ideas of what a more sustainable future could look like in Pennsylvania. I'm going to go through the top row first and then to the second. And these are just some options to give folks a sense of what is possible. So first, we can look at clean tech manufacturing as a way to revitalize economically distressed communities. So again, specifically, I'm thinking about energy communities in this moment. So if a coal plant has shut down, has shuttered, or if steel has left a community, what can we put in to replace that? Clean tech manufacturing is just one example. When I say clean tech, I'm referring to components for solar panels. I'm referring to EV battery manufacturing, things like that. So let's bring those in, let's leverage the labor skills that are already in place, and let's get that community back on its feet. And then we can also think about research and development, biotech and life science industries. And right now, those industries, which tend to pay really, really well, they tend to require quite a bit of education, Those tend to be focused in city centers. So thinking about Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So the question is, how do we expand this into other regions? How do we make it so rural communities, smaller boroughs and villages, how are they able to participate in this and have some of those same opportunities so that really we can reduce, part of it is to reduce the brain drain from some of those communities, and we can make sure that there are exciting opportunities and good paying opportunities in some of these smaller areas. Also thinking about bringing in these facilities like clean tech manufacturing, we need to make sure that they're able to be fueled by renewable energy instead of dirty energy. And also we need to ensure that that energy, that renewable energy was developed here and it was installed by local contractors. Moving down to that second row, really thinking more about residential folks, how like local housing issues and communities. So thinking about energy assessment and energy efficiency efforts, making sure that that is available to residents so that they can reduce home heating and cooling costs. That's incredibly important. And that is one major way that residents, as opposed to industry or workers, are able to participate in decarbonization. And then we need to, the next step is make sure that state and local governments do their job to attract and obtain funding to support low-income residents who want to weatherize their homes to make their homes more energy efficient. And then finally, going back to supply chains, we need to make our supply chains more stronger and more resilient by making them regionally based. And when we do that, when we reduce the distance between point A and point B, that means we're reducing the energy used, and we can also potentially reduce material waste as well. We're going to dive into the report now. And again, the main idea behind this report is economic policy is environmental policy. What do we mean by that? We mean that we know economic development projects shape the landscape. They can also reshape the landscape. They impact everyday life. They influence our air quality, traffic volume, stormwater flow, and local employment opportunities. I first ran into this in my work when I was working in the Delaware River Basin. And we ran into a lot of folks who were concerned about the development of logistics facilities and how that would impact not just flooding, but traffic volume, which then impacts their air quality, et cetera. And so that is just one form of development that we can think of. It can also mean a power plant going in on your backyard. There are a wide range of ways that we can think about this. So this report specifically has several pieces, some broad brushstrokes here. We talk about Pennsylvania's history with fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas. Specifically, we start to talk about dirty hydrogen and the possibility of that coming in within the next few years. We explore what is the DCED, how does it work? We talk about neighboring states and then states further away. What are they doing? How are they decarbonizing? How are they diversifying their economies? And then finally, we have policy recommendations that hopefully the administration and the DCED will look at to start pushing towards a more sustainable economy. So what is the Department of Community and Economic Development? It is an agency that acts as Pennsylvania's primary economic development agency. And it does this in a variety of ways. I'll talk about it a bit more. But at the bottom of this, there is the mission statement. I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but I put this up here just because I wanted to note a couple of things. One, the mission statement for this agency does shift depending on who is running the administration and what their vision for the state is. The latest mission, which was just revised in the last couple of years, does definitely align with Governor Shapiro's economic development plan. So I want to note that the language is very similar. And then finally, there is a phrase in the third line that says cultivating a resilient economy. I would love to see in the future that say cultivate a sustainable economy, an economy based upon renewals, a decarbonized economy, et cetera. So I just want to call that out, that these things can shift and they can evolve over time. So how does the DCED work? Well, there's a few different pieces to this to break it down. First, in the center there, just want to acknowledge that the governor is the one who determines the policy priorities that this agency is going to work on. And then noting the information on the left, the DCED accomplishes these priorities or works towards these goals by receiving and redistributing funds. And it does that through a wide range of programs and initiatives. We can talk about those at another time, but there are a lot of ways that it can use this to further the governor's economic goals. And then finally, just to note that the DCED goes through the budget process, through the legislative review, just like any other agency. Essentially, it finds out what its priorities are. It works to make a plan with the various programs and initiatives. It offers up a budget, and it gets to the secretary. Right now, Secretary Siger gets to answer questions from the state legislature, and then it receives the funding that it receives. So where have fossil fuels gotten us? These are some of the pieces we talk about in the report. So first, as I mentioned before, Governor Shapiro had released his Pennsylvania Gets It Done economic development plan. It did that in February. And we noted here at Penn Future that this plan unfortunately continues to rely on fossil fuels for economic development, and quite frankly, just about completely ignores clean energy and climate change. That's unacceptable. And that's unacceptable for many reasons. One is that, moving on to the next point, Pennsylvania continues to be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the United States. Unfortunately, what happens in Pennsylvania doesn't stay in Pennsylvania in that way. What we do, how we behave, what we incentivize economically, that kind of development directly impacts not just our communities here at home, but also, quite frankly, the planet and the climate. Also, we acknowledge that the fossil fuel industry continues to deliver disappointing economic results and disastrous environmental impacts. It creates a continuous boom-bust cycle that creates instability for workers and for communities. And quite frankly, the fossil fuel industry tends to overpromise on the amount of jobs and the types of wages that folks will receive. And then finally, exploring what some of the other states, some close to home, some not so close to home, are doing. For instance, Ohio and West Virginia are actively shifting their economy towards clean tech manufacturing, particularly battery manufacturing. They're really taking the lead on that. Ohio has been working on changing and diversifying their economy for about 10 years now. And Texas and Wyoming, two petro states, much like ourselves, are proactively shifting their energy towards renewables. Texas in particular has continued to make a lot of headlines, and they are developing renewables on a massive scale. And ultimately, we ask, if they can do it, why can't we? So continuing to dive into our dependence on dirty energy as it stands right now, in the report, we have a couple of case studies that highlight some examples. The first involves petrochemicals. There was a plan for a larger petrochemical build-out based in southwestern Pennsylvania, where there were supposed to be about 5 facilities, I believe, that were going to be in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And these facilities, well, they didn't pan out. The only one left standing is the Shell cracker plant. The others have fallen by the wayside, and there is no plan for them to develop. The Shell cracker plant, which cost taxpayers about $1.6 billion here in Pennsylvania, essentially what it does is it receives fracked gas, it processes it to change it into ethane. That ethane is then used to make plastic pellets, and those plastic pellets make things. I believe lately Shell has been really excited about making plastic shampoo bottles. And besides the cost to taxpayers, this Shell cracker plant has been an environmental nightmare for the local community. It has racked up tens of millions of dollars of fines from the DEP for air quality violations, and quite frankly, it has not delivered on the jobs that it promised. And so we dive a bit deeper into that in the report. And then the second piece that we look at is dirty hydrogen. When I say dirty hydrogen, this means hydrogen based on fracked gas that then proposes to put the emissions from that process of turning it into hydrogen and putting those emissions into the ground. So it relies on something called carbon capture sequestration, CCS. And there are two projects that we are watching right now that would use this process, that would rely on fracked gas. Again, both of these are focused in southwestern Pennsylvania, and I really want to highlight this because these communities are already overburdened in terms of fossil fuel pollution. The one project you may have heard of is called ARCH2. This is a project that is receiving federal funds from the Department of Energy. And this is to develop multiple facilities across the 3 states, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And again, it would rely on fracked gas to create hydrogen and then rely on CCS to reduce or mitigate any emissions. And y'all should know that CCS is not really a proven technology quite yet. And it's also worth noting that if ARCH2 really does get off the ground and these facilities get built, it will take at least a decade to see jobs. So when I talked about long-term thinking and not watching for shiny objects, this is a potential shiny object. We will not see the economic development results for at least 10 years. The DNA is called the Decarbonization Network of Appalachia. This is a project that applied for federal funding. It did not receive federal funding. And as a matter of fact, the major players that were supposed to support this project, like Shell, abandoned the project. And the largest company left standing right now is Mitsubishi. And this is still within the possibility of being created if they can find more funding. And by they, I mean an organization called Team PA. I'll talk about them in a few minutes. But this is just to note that both of these fracked gas-based facilities would again be based in southwestern Pennsylvania, and this build out could be really large and very impactful. So what are the consequences of business as usual, meaning continuing to rely on fracked gas? We all are smart enough on this call to know what they are. It looks like Pennsylvania falling behind economically. It looks like Pennsylvania workers continuing to experience instability. It looks like continuing to contribute climate warming emissions. And it looks like energy and environmental justice communities continuing to bear the burden of health threats created by the fossil fuel industry, which again is unacceptable, full stop. I'm going to start to breeze through some policy recommendations because I see my time is moving quickly. So we have 2 sets of policy recommendations in the report. The first is directed at the DCED. The second is directed at some other entities that it interacts with on a regular basis. So our 4 recommendations, and I'll dig deeper into these, for the DCED are establishing climate accountability measures, reforming their tracking, reporting, and public disclosure of data, increasing responsiveness to communities, and reforming what is known as their energy program. When it comes to establishing climate accountability measures within the DCD, essentially, the DCD needs to focus on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and the pursuit of a sustainable economy, and essentially make decarbonization one of the department's major policy priorities. That is what we're asking for. We need to make sure that the DCED is looking to facilitate decarbonization as the basis of economic development. And to do that, they also need to adopt climate goals as part of its financing strategies. It needs to track the carbon impacts of projects. This basically harkens to the idea that we don't know what we don't know. So we need to start tracking the carbon impacts of projects. So again, we can start looking at that data, analyzing it, and thinking long term, what do we need to change to continue to decarbonize and become more sustainable? They could also institute green building and efficiency standards, and they should encourage the deployment of on-site renewables. At this point, that is such a low bar. If you're able to put solar panels on a rooftop or on a plot of land, do it. That's kind of baseline at this point. When it comes to tracking, reporting, and public disclosure of data, this is really looking for more transparency. I'm going to be honest, when I started to research the DCED, it was extremely difficult to find data, to find historical documents, to really get information about their tracking. I want to be very clear, I don't think this is nefarious in any way. I really just think that they need to modernize their systems, which is the second bullet point on here. But also we also look at things like adopting carbon footprinting measures, highlighting projects that reduce carbon emissions. Again, the more we highlight the projects that are doing good, the more that we can send out a signal to other companies and other industries that we are interested in that kind of business. They should also be expanding the geographic impact of a program called the Pennsylvania Innovation Economy. Again, this is taking those economic benefits of research and development and life sciences, and how do we expand them outside of the city centers? And then also this final point harkens back to this idea that we're constantly trying to think of how do we connect the DCED and the Department of Environmental Protection? Because if we're talking about decarbonization as the basis of of our economy, essentially, then we're going to need those two agencies to partner together. And specifically, this is a note that the environmental justice viewer that the DEP created really needs to be part of various programs, including this regional challenge. And that brings us to responding to communities. The Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, has an Office of Environmental Justice, and we're really looking to the DCED to leverage that office and its expertise and its capacity to better share information and solicit feedback from under-resourced communities. And on that note, it needs to ensure that that feedback it receives can actually impact development, that it will follow through on that. Because you can build as big a table as you would like, and you can invite all the people that you would like, and you could listen to their voices, but unless you demonstrate that you will act on that feedback, it's incredibly frustrating and disheartening and disenfranchising for communities. And then with all of this, the DCED needs to incorporate environmental justice goals into its financial programs. This energy program, I'm going to try to put it in a nutshell. Essentially, this energy program has its explicit focus in attracting energy-intensive industries. I want y'all to read energy-intensive industries as supporting the fracked gas industry. It is aimed at trying to attract businesses that are interested in cheap fracked gas. So, what are we looking to do? We would like this program to shift its focus and away from that fracked gas industry to that of decarbonization and diversifying the economy. Again, we can't just we can't expect success and high quality of life if we focus on one industry, and in a dirty and polluting and dangerous industry at that. The DCED needs to update, revise, and create tools to support projects and the development of these projects that focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy deployment. It should also be doing things like mapping out prime land for the deployment of solar, wind, as well as manufacturing of renewable technology. So it has created playbooks that help to redevelop decommissioned coal-fired power plants. Unfortunately, a lot of those playbooks end up pushing developers towards developing more gas plants. So how do we take similar tools but flip them so that we work towards decarbonization and deploying clean energy and manufacturing clean technology? And then finally, again, it goes back to communication and public relations. We need to lift up industrial development that does the right thing. So finally, the last set of policy recs. This goes back to the collaborations that the DCED has with other entities. So first, we talk about reforming what is known as Team PA, or the Team Pennsylvania Foundation. I'll get into that into a minute. And then the second piece involves potentially creating a clean energy working group. And I'll explain what that means when we get there. So first, who the heck is Team PA? You may not have heard of them. First of all, they are a 501c3, which means they are a nonprofit entity, nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-political. However, there is an executive order that states that PA agencies must cooperate with this specific nonprofit as it continues its mission to grow Pennsylvania's economy and make it more robust. Team PA has multiple boards. Some of those boards include lawmakers, some of them include industry executives, some of them include organized labor. There are plenty of boards for this organization. And it's worth noting that the governor, no matter who the governor is always a co-chair of Team PA. And lastly, Team PA is explicitly focused on carbon capture sequestration. And again, I will remind you that we can just assume that means fracked gas and propping up the fracked gas industry. So what would we as Penn Future like to see happen with Team PA? Well, first of all, we need to shift its focus so that it acts as a champion for decarbonization, for renewable energy, and for energy efficiency. And it needs to work towards diversifying the economy rather than focusing again on a monoculture. It needs to decrease and limit its board size. Its board members should not be companies that are actively seeking to receive DCED resources. Mitsubishi should not be a board member, considering that Team PA and Mitsubishi would like to develop the decarbonization network of Appalachia. That is one example. Who should be on that board? Community organizations, environmental justice groups, and dare I say, economic development professionals instead of industry executives. And if we were to shift the structure in that way, then Team PA could start to leverage that expertise, and it could do that by breaking things up into smaller working groups that have explicit focuses, like focusing on talent retention and attraction, meaning workforce, project performance. We need folks monitoring these projects that are being built. Public relations would be wonderful. And we could get a work group whose job is to identify key sustainable industries that we need to invest in so that Pennsylvania is not left in the dust of Ohio, West Virginia, Texas, Wyoming, North Carolina. The list goes on. And then finally, this notion of the Clean Energy Working Group. Essentially, this could be a space where various state agencies can get together, create a strategic plan to deploy decarbonization and renewable energy, again, as the basis of our new economy. This working group would focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That would be the primary goal of this in the pursuit of a sustainable economy. And this Clean Energy Working Group, its plan that it develops should align with DEP's Climate Action Plan. If you don't know that DEP has a climate action plan, now you do. And there is no reason that the DCED should not be referring back to that and using that to push decarbonization and sustainable industries and to attract them to Pennsylvania. So I'm going to tie this up with a little bow. We do have some additional resources for you. We do have the full report, Economic Policy is Environmental Policy. It's not that long of a read if you take out the appendix. So please feel free to avail yourself of that, review it. I've also been working on a blog series. Right now, I've got 2 that are up on the website. The first one looks at our report, and the second one takes a wider view and digs deeper into what is sustainability, what is a sustainable economy. So it gives you a little more information than I went through today. And then finally, I'm also going to be giving a very similar presentation on September 10th at 6 p.m. For Del Val One Health That's going to be another webinar. So you are more than welcome to join me again there or share that link around. We don't have it just yet, but when we do, we'll be sure to get it out to our members. So finally, this is me. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Appreciate you taking out the time of your day and for also being willing to do a deep dive into what is a relatively new topic. My email is there. We can put it in the chat. And as I said, I'm working on a blog series. So if you have, after listening to this presentation, any questions you want answered, or if you have any topics or anything else that you would like explained and you think would make a good blog, I truly welcome if you reach out to me and send those suggestions. You can also drop them in the chat. So with that, in just a moment, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can get into some questions and hopefully provide some answers for the last 10 minutes here. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to hand it back over to Jenny.
Donna, thanks so much for providing an overview of the report and sustainable economic development overall. As Donna mentioned, we've got a brief amount of time for Q&A, so thanks to everyone who submitted questions in the Q&A feature. Please continue to add questions as we go along. Both Donna and Pat may provide answers to some of these. However, we probably won't have a chance to get to every question because we're limited for time. Donna shared her email, so I've already gotten permission from Donna to say, please follow up with Donna on your specific questions if they don't get answered. We're going to put her email in the chat as well. So for the first question, we received, are there any free educational programs geared toward carbon mitigation, like solar panel installation or grid management as examples for sustainable economic development? And I'm going to assume that question meant free educational programs for communities, private sector partners, and other stakeholders.
Apologies for that, looking for the unmute. I'm going to check to see if Pat has anything off the top of his head. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Pat.
No, no worries. I know that the Department of Environmental Protection, and again, some of what we're talking about here are how does DCD and how do communities create programs. I know they have funded some climate action plans as well as greenhouse gas inventories at the municipal and county level. I know as follow-up to that they've given some money to communities in order to implement elements of those plans. I'm not sure if specifically the training component asked here is part of that, but we can look into and get you a better answer.
And I will also say, I don't know for certain, but there is something called the Solar Center out there, and they may have additional information on what programs may be available.
Thanks, Donna and Pat. I will say it would be really compelling if there was a joint program for local climate action planning and sustainable development shared by DCD and DEP, or at least that showcased the cooperation across those bureaucratic boundaries. But I digress. Second question that we got, small businesses may find it difficult to meet additional sustainability criteria in addition to existing state requirements. How can small businesses be more effectively helped in a sustainable business model?
That's an excellent question. I will point towards, so there are two sustainable business networks that I can think of here in Pennsylvania. One has been around a bit longer than the other. Sorry, I'm trying to get the name right. Sustainable Business Network of the Greater Philadelphia area, I believe. They may have some more information about what that looks like. I mean, one, to be considered a sustainable business, and two, what are some of those practices? And three, they're going to be more familiar with some of those more specific resources that are out there. And it really depends upon, I want to say it also depends upon your business. Right now, some of our work is focusing mainly on things like manufacturing facilities, but by no means are those the only types of businesses that we want to be sustainable. I just saw some news piece about something that I think it's Montgomery County might be doing, where they're lifting up businesses that are working towards sustainability efforts. And so They have things like restaurants and other kinds of shops, and they lend in that county. I believe the municipalities will lend some support in terms of public relations and helping for maybe applications for various kinds of support, that type of thing. And then there is also a sustainable business network that is growing right now. It is just up and coming. It's based in southwestern Pennsylvania, but it's looking for members across the state. This one is focused a little bit more on industry, specifically manufacturing. And so this is all to say that there are organizations that are out there that are where businesses are the main voice at the table, and they can discuss issues like this. Pat, I see that you are off mute, so I'm going to see if you've got more to add to that.
Sure, and very quickly, there are some resources at the state that I think get kind of criminally underutilized. Small business development centers across the state, technical assistance centers across the state, usually located at universities. If businesses are having an issue, the department itself has a small business ombudsman that you can reach out to and get some additional information. The last 2 points I think I'd make that are interrelated. One is, I think a lot of what we're talking about here at the broad policy level is where the state is focused. So if you look at, just as point of comparison, if you look at DCD's website today, the thing they're broadly advertising as an industry is energy. And it's relatively all-encompassing, has a lot more information about natural gas and technical assistance available for that, training opportunities, et cetera, than some of the others. When you go to Ohio, as Donna mentioned, you look at their focus and it becomes much more specific, where they have built out electric vehicle manufacturing, component manufacturing, as an example, and they've developed specific programs for that. They have branded around that. They are trying to attract very specific segments of that energy business. And what that means broadly is, when you have an economic program that is focused at those broad levels to deliver cleaner energy, cheaper resources, et cetera, that is fundamentally good for small business, where they aren't suddenly getting hit by a high bill for an electricity cost or an energy cost, that gets mitigated, because one of the things about renewable energy, batteries, et cetera, is there is no commodity cost to go up and down on a day-to-day basis in the way that there is with other fuels.
That gets back to that notion of stability and how that is good for the economy. You can plan when you know what's coming.
Thanks, Donna and Pat. The next one's a bit of a philosophical question. We're talking about reforming DCED, is this a top-down effort that will need to drive change at the local level, or is there a space we can carve out to talk about kind of a bottom-up, how local governments and communities can help as well?
Ooh, this is an excellent and a very big question, and there's so many ways that I want to answer this. And I think the short answer is the change is going to happen at various levels. So the DCED has, when I mentioned that it has a wide range of programs, it has access to almost 200 programs and initiatives. Now, the majority of those are kind of shelved right now, they're archived. But to give you a sense, these programs and initiatives range from Act 47, which is geared towards lending financial support to distressed municipalities and helping them kind of reform their finances and get back on their feet and functional again, all the way up to the latest program that Governor Shapiro added called PA Sites, which is aimed at providing funding for folks to redevelop brownfield sites. And so from that example, I'm just trying to show that when it comes to the DCED, it's it has its hands in anything from municipal level government and support for those governments all the way up to large scale developers and industrial developers. And also the DCED is somewhat connected to, I hope I don't mess this up too much, sustainable municipalities, I think. There's a sustainable municipality program as well. And so again, we can come at this in terms of how do we build a sustainable economy and reform DCED. We can come at it from all sorts of levels. And then the last thing I'll say is, if you notice in the presentation, I mentioned the Office of Environmental Justice and providing a voice and a voice that matters, that has impact for energy communities, for environmental justice communities. And so that is also important. So I feel like there's all sorts of levels that this change needs to happen at. And again, the DCED is kind of ripe for this kind of change because it already has those pieces built into it. And Pat, again, I see, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add top down, bottom up. I always prefer option 3, which is meet in the middle. And I think the reality is when you're talking about something like this, and again, there's enough data out there to show and would commend to folks looking to look at Ohio River Valley Institute and some of the reporting that they've done. That, for example, around the Shell plant. We talked about the environmental issues with that. Economically, they are not doing better in that county than the surrounding counties or the rest of the state. So some of this is recognizing when even the economic goals that you've set out are not working and are not delivering the results that are promised when the incentives are first put forward, and looking for those things that are working, not just in our state, but in surrounding states, to make sure we're leveraging that so we're not being left behind.
Thanks, Donna and Pat, for tackling a big question like that right before time. We are actually at 7:01, and Annie has put in the chat that we can stay around for a few more minutes to address some of these questions. I did just want to comment on Donna's mention of Sustainable Pennsylvania Communities. That was an effort of the PA Municipal League and Sustainable Pittsburgh, which harkens back to the, are there free resources available for different stakeholders for sustainable development? Sustainable Pittsburgh is an example of an entity that was able to get some movement within DCED. The DCED application portal asks, is your community part of a sustainable Pennsylvania community? So we've seen some of that integration happen, but obviously, as Donna has showed, there's a lot more that could be done in reforming DCED. So are we okay to ask one more question?
I'm okay for one more.
Okay. This one is specific to battery manufacturing that we referenced as a sustainable economic development sort of sector we're thinking about. It can be carbon intensive. And so the question was, do you know, the question itself is battery manufacturing can be quite carbon intensive. Do you know whether Ohio and West Virginia are requiring battery manufacturers to reduce their carbon footprints?
See how I'm hesitating to see if Pat comes off mute first. I'm sorry, I was just learning about the manufacturing plant that's going up in Weirton, West Virginia, and I'm trying to bring information to the front of my brain. Pat, you have something?
Yeah, I can help. I mean, one, I think, and you'll hear this on, I think, both sides of a lot of these issues, that the reality is there is no perfect energy source. There is no way that avoids all emissions. The things that we're looking to do are reduce the impacts that we're having. So when it comes to battery manufacturing, yes, it can be carbon intensive depending on process, but it also is embodying that energy into a thing that will operate and cycle on and on for many years. So you're not combusting something over and over and over again in order to generate that electricity you're using it to store. In the case of Weirton in particular, they're actually building iron air batteries that avoid a lot of kind of the worst elements of what you hear about different battery chemistries. These are designed to be kind of grid scale, longer use, larger storage batteries, but they don't include things like cobalt, which a lot of the battery manufacturers are looking at ways of reducing. And then I think the final thing, and it goes to something Donna said, as she was discussing the battery piece, which is the rare earth elements and metals that are used in these are things that can be recycled, can be reused. So it's important that as we're developing these systems, that they're not things ending up in our trash, that they are in fact going back and that we are seeing sustainably reclaimed and reused, so that we're not continuing to mine metals, we're not continuing to mine resources at scale in order to continue production.
Pat, thanks for answering that from a kind of life cycle comparison level. I want to thank everyone who was able to hang on with us for a few extra minutes. I just want to give a reminder that Donna has made her email address available. So if your question wasn't answered or something else comes up after you log off tonight, Donna is available to address questions. So Donna, I'll give it back over to you for the formal kind of closing, and thank you.
Oh boy, yeah. And also, if you all have any ideas for a blog topic on sustainable economics, or if you have more questions about this sort of industry, if maybe that means there's a blog about how battery manufacturing can or is more sustainable than some of the things that we've already been doing. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Appreciate you being part of the beginnings of this conversation, and we're very eager at Penn Future to see where this leads all of us. So with that, on behalf of Jenny, Pat, and Annie, I'm gonna thank y'all for being out here, and I hope y'all have a good night.